Hey, what's happening, Herpers? My name's Joe, and today we've got a kind of different video than normal. This week is this month's patron chosen topic for a video, and all of my patrons this month, or almost all of them, at least 86% of them, voted the topic for this month's video to be introducing you one by one to all of my reptiles, where they came from, and what their backstories are for their names and information like that. So in this video, I will be doing exactly that. I'll be going through all of my reptiles, giving you a little bit more information on their backstories, where they came from, why I named them what I named them. That way you can get to know them all a little bit better. Anyway, I think it's pretty fitting that this topic choice won this month because it was just Thanksgiving a few days ago. This is the time of year to be with friends and family, human and non-human friends and family included. And it's a good opportunity for me to reflect on the animals I have in my collection and just how thankful I am for each and every one of them and the role they play in my life. But with Thanksgiving behind us, that does mean Christmas is just around the corner, and every year I get questions about what pet snakes make good gifts, and I honestly have to say none. So what pet lizards make good gifts? Also none. And I'm going to get into that in this video as well. So while I introduce you to all of my reptiles in this video, I'm also going to be talking a little bit about why, even as a reptile lover and somebody who thinks that there is a great amount of value to be had in keeping reptiles and bonding with reptiles and having reptiles as pets in your life, I don't think they should ever be a gift. I think outside of very specific circumstances, reptiles should not be gifts. 99% of the time we'll talk about when it might be okay and when I think it is an alright option. So if you want to meet all of my reptiles and learn a little bit more about why I don't think reptiles should ever be gifts, then smash the like button like it's a Black Friday doorbuster sale on 50% off ball pythons, and we'll get right into it. So in order of when they joined the family, the first reptile I have to introduce you to is... Gosh, it takes me a minute to think about it at this point. But the reptile I currently have had for the longest is my red-tailed boa constrictor, Cleo. I got Cleo all the way back in summer of 2014, and she is one of the reptiles I purchased. She's actually the only reptile I have ever ordered online and had shipped to my door. Or more accurately, my parents' door, because I was still living at home at that time. I graduated high school in 2014, so graduate high school, why not get a boa constrictor? Horrible timing, but it worked out for me and my life circumstances. But generally, you don't want to get a big snake right before you might be having major life changes, because you don't know if you're going to have room to house that snake or provide for it, or if you're going to college, if you're going to be sneaking it into dorms, which I don't recommend doing. But those are all the sorts of things you need to plan for with snakes and any reptile, because a lot of them can live for 10 plus years, 20 years, 30 years, depending on the species. And when you start getting into things like turtles and tortoises, they can have lifespans that go well beyond 50 or even 100 years. So something you want to definitely plan about when you're considering what reptiles will fit into your life and what reptiles will be a good match for you. So I got Cleo as a hatchling in the summer of 2014, and that means that she is just over 8 years old now, going on 9 years old, which still makes her a very young boa constrictor. She has done a lot of her growing, most of her growing at this point, but they never truly stop growing, so she fits in her enclosure now, but I do kind of anticipate having to get her a larger enclosure down the road. But her enclosure that she has right now perfectly does meet her needs. But that is something else to consider with big reptiles like boa constrictors that never truly stop growing. You never truly get to stop buying new stuff for them as they get bigger and their needs expand. But I've got to say, in all 8 years of having Cleo, I have absolutely loved every minute of it. She is one of my favorite reptiles, hands down. She's one of my friendliest reptiles. But anyway, that is Cleo, my boa constrictor imperator, and I probably should have specified that she is not a true boa constrictor earlier, because if I don't say it, people will be calling me out for it in the comments. I know she's not a true boa constrictor. Most boa constrictors in the pet trade aren't true boa constrictors, and if you get a boa constrictor that is any sort of morph, like Cleo here technically is, she's a hypomelanistic or salmon morph. If you have any sort of morph of boa constrictor, it's usually more likely that they're going to be a boa constrictor imperator, which just means they're not a true boa constrictor and they don't get quite as big, which is a plus for a lot of reptile keepers anyway. And I put off saying where her name came from because this is one of the reptiles I remember the least why I chose Cleo to be her name. I don't know if it was other reptile keepers I'd seen. I now realize Cleo is a fairly common name for snakes, and I don't know if I realized that at the time, but working at a sanctuary and seeing a lot that came in, I've seen a fair number of Cleos. But in a really random twist of events, a few years down the road, after I had had Cleo for a few years, after she had had that name, after I had already had a red-tailed boa for a while, we ended up finding some new information about my wife's biological father that we didn't know at the time, and it turns out he also had a red-tailed boa constrictor named Cleo. Weird coincidence, but probably just more evidence that Cleo is a really common snake name, and I probably wasn't the most original 18-year-old out there when I named her. Next up, I'm going to show you my most vicious reptile. I'm holding her right here, and yep, it's just a little leopard gecko. Now, this is far from the only leopard gecko I've ever owned. Right around the same time I got Cleo, I was also getting into reptile breeding. It wasn't anything on a large scale, but even when I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to work with reptiles. I knew that that was my passion, what I really wanted to be around and what I wanted to work with. And so I figured a great way to learn more about reptiles and kind of dip my toes into the industry, so to speak, was to start breeding leopard geckos. I don't recommend this, but I did learn a lot from it. One of the things is how much it can start to cost to feed a big collection of reptiles. Very early on into breeding leopard geckos, I realized that to do it sustainably and have any hope of making a profit, which really I was just hoping to break even and learn about the process and add to my knowledge. But even to break even, I had to start breeding my own roaches, which was not just say was not popular with my wife, a girlfriend at the time, or the rest of my family, because I was still living at home at that time. So I had a section of my bathroom that had a bunch of roach tubs in it for my geckos. Now I only actually bred them for one season. Like I said, it wasn't something I really planned on doing long term, but it taught me a lot about reptile husbandry, because one of the things about them is if you don't take care of your reptiles well, they're not going to thrive and they're not going to breed for you. If you're interested in this, I'll talk more about it and maybe make a whole video on why I got out of leopard gecko breeding. But the moral of the story is I did it for one season, I learned a lot from it, and then I was able to use that experience to get a job at a reptile sanctuary, volunteering at first, and then eventually actually working with the reptiles there. And by that point, I had even less time to focus on personal breeding projects, so I scrapped all that and just put all my energy into working at the sanctuary and doing the best I could for the animals there. But anyway, this is the one and only leopard gecko that I still have. I was able to find homes for all the others, gave them away to some of the volunteers at the sanctuary, sold a few to qualified people and people I trusted to take care of them, and I just couldn't part with this one for two reasons. One, I was a little sentimental. This one gave me a lot of my first eggs. And the other reason I kept this one is, believe it or not, she is one of my most defensive animals. It's not unusual that she will bite me when I first reach into her enclosure. She just wasn't ever that friendly. And I think being bred, whether it was the hormones of actually producing the eggs or the stress of being with mates, she's still a fairly defensive gecko, and I didn't want to give people a gecko that's going to bite them. So between me getting attached to her and her sassiness, and also just not wanting to send her loose with family where she'll bite some kids' fingers off, not really, their bites don't do that. They're shocking, they kind of hurt a little bit, but they do less than a paper cut. But I decided that I've got space for her. I do love keeping leopard geckos. They're very interesting looking animals. They'll come up and beg when they're hungry. They do have their little different personalities, so they're a fun and rewarding species to keep, and I'm very happy that I still have one and can kind of remember that time in my reptile keeping career and life with her. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot to explain her name. When I first got into leopard gecko breeding, it started with taking in two for a friend that no longer wanted them or just couldn't take care of them anymore. So all of a sudden I had two, and then I went out and I got a couple more females, and I got a bunch all at once. And so rather than being creative and thinking of names for each of them, I just went down and gave them all a different planet name, and Jupiter was the one that I ended up keeping. And I have now had her for about 8 years. She was an adult when I got her, which could mean anything from being 3 to 4 years old would be my guess. So 3 to 4 years plus 8. We're looking at a lizard somewhere between 10 and 15 years old, most likely. So I will have plenty more years to keep making memories with her, because leopard geckos can live to be 20, and some leopard geckos have even been documented to live into their late 20s. Now moving on to my next reptile. She is one of everybody's favorites and one that you hopefully already know and love if you've been subscribed to the channel for a while, and that is my Argentine red tegu L. Now, I'm not proud to admit, Elle was the closest thing to an impulse reptile purchase I've ever made. The way that I got Elle my tegu, I kind of blame on being wrapped up in being in the new world of working at a reptile sanctuary and going to reptile expos and just having to resist that constant itch of seeing new animals that need a home coming in every day, going to shows with amazing reptiles around you all the time, and not having the willpower to say no, and knowing that I had the space to have a baby tegu and would have the space as it grew to keep providing for it. So it was just a bad combination of having the ease of access and knowing that I could do it at this point. But anyway, I got Elle when I was volunteering for a reptile sanctuary. Every year they went to a few different reptile expos, and we had gone to an out-of-state expo, and my good friend at the time went there with tegu goggles on. He knew that's what he was looking for and what he wanted, and I had just spent my entire summer leading up to this expo season taking care of all the big lizards at the sanctuary and the tegus, and just falling in love with tegus and what amazing lizards they are. So hearing my friend talk about getting one, having all the upfront experience now and knowing how to take care of them and what I'm getting myself into, I couldn't resist. And so I started looking for a tegu at that expo too. Now, I was a volunteer at the time, so I wasn't able to really look around the expo for long. I had about 30 minutes to look around the expo for the weekend, and I kid you not, I ran the perimeter, then up and down all the hallways, just looking for a tegu. And by this point, the vendor that my friend who went there originally planning on getting a tegu had already sold out, didn't have anything besides a few designer morphs that were way out of my price range. Then all of a sudden, I see something kind of out of place. I don't know what type of vendor it was to this day. He had a bunch of reptile equipment with him, like cocoa peat and egg tubs. He was selling a few leopard geckos. It seemed like if he bred anything at all, it was leopard geckos. And for some reason, he had the one tegu that was left that I could find in this whole expo at his table. And so I talked with him a little bit. He explained to me that he got it from a buddy and as part of a trade. I don't know what their initial trade was. She was a hatchling from that year, and this was 2016. But he had this tegu as the last one in the show, and I had really set my heart on getting a tegu at this point. And so I made the impulse buy. I ran to an ATM. I didn't even have the cash with me, so I paid the jacked up reptile show ATM fees. And I got a $200 red tegu with a pretty screwed up looking tail. The vendor assured me that it was just getting ready to shed and that it was just starting at the tail. That was not the case, and is why if you've ever paid close attention to Elle's tail, it does have a bunch of jagged kinks in it, and it kind of looks like it might be a calcium deficiency thing. I've had a few people bring that up, and while that could be a factor, I think it's just the result of a tegu growing back their tail. Now, she was really young when this happened, and that could be why she was so successful in growing back her tail, but a lot of people will tell you that they just can't do it. It's impossible. Tegus will just grow back a little nub. But anyway, after I'd had her home for a week, her tail was looking worse and worse, and I realized at that point that it wasn't her starting to shed, it was a couple layers of stuck shed that she had never been able to successfully get off her tail. That caused the blood flow going through the tail to be constricted and that tissue to die and eventually fall off. So I ended up needing to bring her to a vet who ended up removing the tail because that's how necrosed it was. There was no hope for saving it. But amazingly, it did grow back, and that is why it looks the way that it looks today. It's possible that during the time she was regenerating her tail, that to regrow all that bone at once, maybe there was a bit of a calcium shortage, but I think it was just a result of her body having to regenerate so much of itself when she was so small at such a young age. But as you know, she is doing very well now. She is a very active lizard, very intelligent lizard, will chase me around the house for her food. And sometime around this spring/summer, she will be going on 7 years old. That means that a lot of her growing, like Cleo, is also done. Female tegus, which she is, you can tell easily because she doesn't have those big male tegu cheeks, don't get quite as big. Thankfully, I'm very happy I have a female tegu, so I don't have to have as much space as I would need to have for a male tegu. But she will continue to grow a little bit here and there. A lot of reptiles never truly stop growing, but her growth will really slow down from this point on. But again, just like my gecko and my boa, Elle should be here with me for many, many more years. Tegus with proper care can also live to be 20 to 30 years old, so there will be many more years of Elle to enjoy. And again, I almost forgot to mention, Elle's name came at a time where most of my pets previous to this I had named after horror movie characters. I had one other pet lizard before this that was named Cujo after the Stephen King novel. One of the male geckos that I was using for breeding at the time was named Norman after Psycho, and I wanted another kind of horror themed name to go along with it, and I think that was either the year that Stranger Things came out or at least the year that I started watching Stranger Things. So Elle, my tegu, is named after Elle, or 11 from Stranger Things. Alright, now getting into the last of my pet reptiles. This is the last pet snake that I acquired, and technically she isn't mine, she is my wife's. This is a snake I got somebody as a gift, and I will use to kind of segue into why you don't want to get people reptiles as a gift most of the time. But this is Lucy, and she technically is not mine, she is my wife's, and I got Lucy for her 1 year for our anniversary. It was when she was also involved at the sanctuary and was volunteering with the animals and starting to really appreciate snakes. She also really had grown to like Cleo, my larger snake, and so she was interested in getting one herself. One of our friends who we had hung out with for a while was actually breeding them, and she had held her snakes and held the adult Honduran milk snakes that Lucy here came from and really liked hers. So when that friend had eggs, I was able to get one of the babies for my girlfriend at the time, my now wife, And it worked out well. She knew this species, so I knew she wasn't going to be afraid of him. And I had all the equipment and knowledge to help out with the care, so it wasn't like I was just tossing an animal on someone and saying, learn how to care for it now. And that's kind of what I want to talk about with the idea of getting pet reptiles for people. It is one thing if the person is requesting it, if it's a family member that you know and you know they are going to want it and going to be able to accurately provide the care that that reptile needs. That's awesome. If you're in a situation like that, go ahead and get a pet reptile. My wife knew what she wanted, knew that this was going to be a snake that we could take care of. We had already been in a very stable relationship for years and weren't planning on separating, so I didn't have that to worry about, which is something else you need to consider when you're possibly getting a pet with somebody. But as you might have noticed with a lot of my reptiles, I keep mentioning how long they all live. A lot of these animals will live 20 to 30 years, and I really think people should go into buying reptiles for themselves and other people with the same consideration that you would go into buying a tattoo. Yeah, tattoos are lifelong and this is only 20 to 30 years, but that's still a big chunk of your life, and you want to really consider, is this snake going to fit me in 10 to 20 years? Is this going to fit my life in 10 to 20 years? Or is having a reptile themed tattoo that says cold-blooded fiend across my forehead going to potentially negatively affect me down the road or make things harder for me down the road? It's a very exaggerated example, but I think it works with reptiles because it is a similar size commitment. They cost a lot to feed, they live a long time, and they always have needs, vet appointments, things like that really just stack up and make it something hard to pick for somebody else. So I'll say that is the rule of thumb. Unless it is a close family member that you know can provide for the snake, will care for it accurately and give it what it needs, and they have either asked for the specific species that you're getting them, or you know just beyond the shadow of the doubt it is what they want, I would not buy them a reptile, just like I wouldn't pick out a tattoo for them, because that is a lot of pressure and is going to be a part of their life for a very long time. But anyway, I believe we got Lucy here in 2017, October of 2017. She was a baby from earlier in that year, so she is going on about 5 years old now. And her name Lucy was chosen by my wife. I don't know exactly where it came from. Alright, and I just went and checked, and she said that it was Lucy, as in I love Lucy. We were given the snake as probably being a female. I have never personally probed her, but then the other thought was if she ever turned out to be a male and not a female, then it would be Lucy from the little demon character from Disenchantment. But anyway, with the introduction of our last pet snake out of the way, I will get on to introducing the snakes that I don't consider to be pets. So this next snake, just because he isn't a pet doesn't mean that I don't love him, and you've seen plenty of him on the channel. Just last week I did a video taking him out of his enclosure to clean up some poop in his habitat and get his glass cleaned up. He's already made a big mess of his glass again. But if you don't know who I'm talking about already, I am talking about Spot, my western diamondback rattlesnake, and I will show you why he is named Spot right now. So like I said, he's been hard at work messing up his glass again, but he is sitting in a way right now that lets me show you why I named him Spot. You can see he is a western diamondback rattlesnake, and they get that name from all of those kind of diamond-ish patterns going down their back. I know, a very creative name. Sometimes people will refer to them as coontails as well because of that black and white striping leading up to the tail. But the reason I call this one Spot is, well, it's a dog name, and I think it's pretty funny to call a rattlesnake a dog name, but it is that extra little blotch or diamond right there between that diamond in the center of the screen now and that diamond. That is the only kind of weird extra blotch he has. I thought it was funny that he had a spot on him. And again, I just like the idea of giving a very normal dog name to a very abnormal animal to keep. Which brings me to why I have him in the first place. So I do not consider any sort of seriously venomous snake a pet just because they can cause serious harm to you. Also, depending on where you live, it may or may not be legal to keep them. Here in Arizona, I have the necessary permits to keep up to 4 of every species. Again, I do not recommend that this is something you just get into lightly. The reason I have Spot here is actually because another friend of mine had been keeping him for years, and eventually he just didn't want him anymore. He figured it's a western diamondback. Doesn't need a western diamondback. They're not the most unique snakes, and they're a liability to have around because they're venomous, and so he wanted to just toss Spot back out in the desert. The problem with that is we don't even know if Spot was initially a wild caught snake or if Spot was bred in captivity somewhere. His backstory was unknown to both of us, so that's kind of one strike going against it. You don't know what captive animals have in them, and you don't know if a snake that has never been in the wild will have what it takes to survive in the wild. And the other thing that really freaked me out and concerned me was this person's collection had dealt with mites in the past, had dealt with other infectious diseases, and that is a huge liability for not just the snake you're releasing into the wild, but more importantly, the entire native population, because if this snake were to bring mites back out into the wild or some other snake disease out into the wild, it could potentially infect a whole population and have a huge ripple effect that negatively impacts the ecosystem. So being horrified that that was the plan for this snake and not being comfortable with the idea of it being out in the wild or even knowing if it would survive in the wild, even if it didn't expose the wild to a bunch of new risks, I said, you know what? No, don't worry. I've been taking care of venomous snakes professionally now for years. I can handle keeping a rattlesnake. I'd kept rattlesnakes for short durations before this, things where I was pulling them out of neighbors' garages during the cold season and wanted to wait till a sunnier day to release them in a better place, things like that. So I had some minimal experience that way and had worked with them professionally, so I felt comfortable taking this one in and keeping them personally. But I do want to drive home again, I don't recommend people keep venomous snakes. I don't recommend people just take one in lightly. It is a huge commitment. They can also live 20 to 30 years. 15 to 25 years is a little bit more typical for rattlesnakes, but they can have very long lifespans and they can be dangerous for that entire time. So by keeping a rattlesnake, you are not only committing to their care for the duration of its entire life, or being able to at least find somebody else to take on the care when you get bored of it or get scared of it, and it's also taking on the challenge of keeping this snake for 30 years without getting bit. This snake could potentially have up to 30 years to get a shot in at me. Not that it wants to bite me, but if I mess up and put myself in that position, I have to be mistake-free for 30 years or suffer very, very serious consequences. And that is why I will never consider any venomous snake a pet or recommend that it's something that others do. And now my last snake altogether, another one that I do not consider a pet, but I did willingly acquire this one. This is an albino western diamondback rattlesnake, so the same exact species as the last one. Now this is a snake that I'm very close to. It's actually a snake that I bred, and if you've followed this channel for a long time, you've actually probably seen him as a baby and got to see him be born. And that's because he was featured on the first ever video I posted on this channel about rattlesnake eggs and, well, the fact that they don't lay eggs, and that's not how rattlesnakes are born, they give live birth. So you've actually seen him back when he was a little baby pink bubblegum rattlesnake if you followed along for a long time. But that is how I ended up getting him. He was the offspring of some rattlesnakes I was caring for professionally. Rattlesnakes aren't the most desirable venomous snake out there, partly because they're just so common here in the US. Now that's not necessarily true for other parts of the world. Other parts of the world, they see rattlesnakes and their jaws drop. But here in Arizona, you're not allowed to buy, sell them, or do much with them, and people just don't care about rattlesnakes all that much in general. So now we had all these babies that needed to be rehomed. I'm not sure exactly what happened to all the babies. They were very quickly transferred to other facilities because we were full and didn't have room for them, but because we had to house so many so quickly, I asked if it would be possible for me to keep one of the albino babies, and thankfully my bosses agreed. At the time they said they needed another rattlesnake, like they needed a hole in the head, and they said they'd gladly let me take them for the work that I had done and taking care of these snakes. And so that is the one venomous snake I did go out of my way to ask if I could keep and acquire. I do love him very much, and he is a very cool reminder of that time in my life. But again, I want to highlight that I was doing this professionally at this time, and I don't recommend that just anybody out there go and get a rattlesnake because you see mine and you see that they're cool or cute or whatever, or you see the relationship that we have, or it seems that we have. This is something that has been gained over many, many years of studying and working with reptiles, and I know I probably sound like a broken record by now, but don't get a pet rattlesnake. That's all there is to it. So my albino western diamondback Bojangles was born with 27 other rattlesnakes, I believe in September of 2019, and that makes him 3 years old now. And at the time where he was born, I was listening to a lot of horror podcasts. I was trying to keep up the kind of horror character names things for reptiles. We'd gotten away from it a bit, but I was trying to think of one, and I really liked the podcast Sayer at the time, which is a sci-fi horror podcast I can't recommend enough if you are into that sort of thing. One of the evil AIs in that podcast is named Ocean, and so I thought of naming him that. My wife absolutely hated the name, so I went back to the drawing board. I had also been listening to the podcast Time Suck a lot at this time. I had been binge listening to the entire back catalog of it. If you don't listen to it, this I won't even try to explain it because it's too weird to get into here, but if you know, you know. Bojangles is a three-legged, eye-patch-wearing pit bull in that podcast. If you know, you know. And I thought that was a pretty funny name. I can't say my wife liked the name Bojangles much better than the name Ocean for him, but once I thought of it and something about the jangles and kind of like the idea of the sound that makes and being a rattlesnake name, it just worked and I liked it. So Bojangles stuck, and that is how he got his weird name. And of course I have not been bitten by either of my rattlesnakes, Spot nor Bojangles, in the 3 years that I've had him. He's about 3 years old now, which means I do have many years to look forward with him, because he will hopefully live somewhere between 20 and 30 years. So that was the last of my reptiles and the last of my vertebrates I had to share with you today, but I do have one more animal to share with you, and it is another kind of pseudo-rescue slash experiment. It wasn't a pet I went out and bought or even planned on getting, but it was an animal I found. I normally don't take animals I find home with me. Depending on the type of animal, there are a lot of laws preventing you from doing that, so be careful with where you are. But in Arizona, we don't have many laws about our scorpions out here, and this was a desert hairy scorpion that I found missing a pincher in the middle of the day. I was cleaning up some trash, black garbage bag left out in the desert, I don't know why, but pulled it up. As soon as I picked up the trash bag, the scorpion went scurrying out from under it, and I kind of jumped back at first, and then I noticed something was wrong. He was missing his arm, and he was kind of going in circles and not really looking like he was doing all that well. It was a black garbage bag, so it was really hot. It was the middle of summer, and I don't know if it was too much heat for him or if he had just lost the arm recently. But I was familiar enough with other spiders and arachnids to know that it is common for them to lose legs, and then when they molt, they will actually grow them back eventually. And so I figured this would be a really cool opportunity to take care of the scorpion for a little while. They're an arachnid, they'll grow their arms back too. And I ended up finding out that's not true, and have a whole other video on my channel about when I decided to bring Captain Hook home, as I ended up naming him. I know, not the most sensitive thing with his missing claw, but I thought it was funny. So Captain Hook is the name that stuck, and if you want to know more about when I got him and how I got him and how I learned that scorpions aren't like other arachnids and why he will never have both of his claws ever again. But with that, you have been introduced to all of my pets. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope I wasn't too preachy when I was talking about why I don't recommend people buy reptiles as gifts for people. I hope that you enjoyed getting to know all of my reptiles a little bit better and getting to know where their weird names come from. Let me know which one was your favorite, what names you liked, and if you're planning on getting any reptiles or know that you're going to be getting any reptiles this season, let me know what you're planning on naming them and where the names came from. I do my best to respond to as many comments as I can, so leave them down below. If you watched the video this far, I hope it means that you liked it, so drop a like to let the algorithm know too, so others can see this video. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. YouTube doesn't do a very good job of notifying my subscribers when I upload new videos, which is every single Saturday, so if you want to make sure you don't miss a future upload, make sure to hit that notification bell. And with that, I would like to one last time thank the patrons that made this video possible. This was the patron chosen topic for this month's video, and if you'd like to help choose the topic for next month's patron chosen video, you can do so by signing up at the link in my description down there to support me on Patreon. Over on Patreon, you can get sneak peeks to future videos, projects I'm working on, as well as that creative control of one video I post every month that is chosen by my patrons. So again, if that interests you, check it out at the link in the description. You can sign up to support me over there for as little as $3 a month and get your name in the end credits of every full video. And with that, I have to thank my head herpers. These are the patrons that support me at the highest tier level every single month. Those patrons are Allie Ward, Amanda Lynn, Bobby Cromer, Deborah Torgerson, JCH, hey, thanks Mom, Lavenders, Lindsay Justice, Sierra Sicard, and Tiffany H. And of course, I would like to thank all of my patrons at the other tier levels that make this channel possible. I could not do it without you guys, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. I hope none of you get re-gifted a pet king cobra for Christmas, but most of all, I hope that you just keep herping.